To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land in which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, as well as acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be here this evening. Our membership this evening is as listed in the agenda, with Councillor Lawrence on an approved leave of absence, and there are apologies from Councillor Amir, who is unwell, and Councillor Lawrence. Item 3 is disclosures of conflicts of interest. Are there any disclosures? No. Thank you. Item 4 is the confirmation of the minutes of the Planning Committee held on the 13th of March 2018. It's moved by Councillor Rennie and seconded by Councillor Greco. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Item 5 is consideration of reports. 5.1, application for a planning permit at 409 St George's Road, Thornbury. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application seeks approval to develop a five-storey mixed-use development. It also includes a ground floor shop and contains 14 dwellings. The dwellings are made up of 2 single-bedroom and 12 two-bedroom dwellings. I should point out, Madam Mayor, that there's quite a range in size of these dwellings. Some of the two-bedroom dwellings are up to 125 square metres. That's larger than most three-bedroom dwellings that this committee has seen in apartment building. There are 17 car parking spaces, and as you'll see in the report, there's a description of how they work. They are for a mechanic system. The subject land is within the commercial 1 zone. It is provided with the design development overlay, which has that mandatory 5-storey height limit and the height as well. The subject land has an area of 575 square metres, and there is a good description of the context, what's around the site, parking restrictions, etc. on page 7 of the officer's report. Notice of the application has been provided. There have been 7 objections received. These are detailed and summarised and responded to on pages 7 to 10 of the officer's report. The application has been assessed as having a high level of compliance, particularly with clause 58, which is the Bell Apartments requirements, which are now embedded in the planning scheme. The council should note that conditions have been applied to address what the assessment identified as a shortfall in the disability access requirements that are in clause 58. There is also, and that appears as condition 1P, there is also a condition in there which has been voluntarily agreed to by the applicant, which deals with an electric vehicle car charging station. Accordingly, the report recommends that the application, subject to a number of those minor changes, is supported and approved with a notice of decision to be issued.
Thank you. I will now call on the applicant to make a submission to the committee. So, John Clarica, can you come forward? Yes. You'll have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
The design has gone through a 1.5 process to reach this stage to try and meet council's policies.
Could you just speak into the microphone? Sorry.
And the DDO requirements.
Thank you.
I suppose I'll just address the grounds of objection primarily. The first one, I suppose, relates to height. A number of issues related, objections related to 5-storey height. The council's housing strategy raises this area as a substantial pound change area. It's an area slated a 5-storey development in the DDO and 17 metres, and the design has met that in that 5-storey, which I think is just under 7 metres. And so I suppose when it comes to the objections, in objecting against height, this is something that should probably be taken up a while ago when the amendment came in the DDO that encourages this form of development along St George's Road, particularly in the commercial 1 zones. However, in recognising that we've designed quite a large setback towards the rear of the building increases in height that complies with the DDO requirements. Overshadowing, there is a minor overshadowing at 9 AM. From 10 AM onwards, it doesn't overshadow any respected if council is encouraging a 5-storey building along this part of St George's Road. And so after 10 units, it's quite clear. Looking overlooking, all the balconies to the rear, that is the west, face the residential properties have been screened, so there are no unreasonable views within 9 metres as per the planning scheme requirements. There are upper level balconies that don't have ones 1700 high screens, but they are beyond 9 metres from the private space. And then the note is also a roof deck. That roof deck is primarily oriented towards the east, that is St George's Road, and set back in excess of 20 metres to the closest residential building, which is separated from the site by right of way. Car parking. If you look at the whole numbers, there's an under provision of 1 car parking space by removing the crossover at the front and gaining 1 car space to the street. So it kind of meets that. If you look at the individual uses, there's an over provision of residential car parking. We require 14, we require 17 for the residences. We're asking for a reduction of visitor car parking, as I said, we're gaining 1 on street by removing the crossover. And we're asking for a reduction of 2 car parking spaces, short-term spaces for the shop, retail premises. And the car parking station, it says there's ample public transport in the area, there's bicycle facilities, and there's parking cars in the area to have that short-term parking demand. One other aspect is traffic, inspection of traffic, particularly on that driveway. We've noticed an obstacle there as well. There's 7 additional vehicle movements per peak hour along that driveway, and neither council traffic engineers nor the traffic engineers engaged has seen that as an issue. 7 vehicle movements is just not an issue in that driveway at all. Given that at the present time there's only 5 vehicle movements during the peak hour, so it brings up to 12. That's 1 every 5 minutes. The next aspect, I suppose, relates to, the big objection relates to the active frontage. Even though the site and the drilling sites are presently dwellings, it is a commercial one, so in anticipation of a higher demand for commercial retail and office premises along St George's Road, which should be overcome with its potential. So we expect that it have smaller shops and commercial premises fronting St George's Road, and this caters towards that future demand. I think they're pretty much the grounds of objection that I have. When looking at the design, council often encourages apartments to face the front and the rear, rather than side-facing apartments, so equitable development rights for joint properties are kept, and this has been we try very hard to maintain that, so we have front and rear facing private open space.
20 seconds left.
What, 5 minutes?
Keep going. You've got 20 seconds left. Yep.
And one of the aspects of the design I've mentioned before is the active frontage to the facade, and that's imperative when you're encouraging commercial ones, encouraging retail uses to main roads, and also encourages visibility, surveillance, and activity.
Thank you. That's time now. I'll now call on an objector, Guido Genzi. Just yet, if you'd like to take a seat.
We're the only property to the rear, completed by the rear of Dalton. We don't really have any problem with Dalton at all. In fact, we think it's the rear apart from. I question the number of car movements that Anne's talked about there. There's quite a few more there. I don't know if you see me away. I haven't spent much time painting all our fence along that lane. And know how many cars would go through there in this photographs. So the reasons out anyway would be really good. But the owners of the only property situated directly behind the proposed development and separated by a narrow lane, we are most impacted by the parking proposal. The main objection to the proposal is the intention to access vehicle parking from the rear lane rather than from St George's Road. planned parking arrangement allows for access via a lane separating our property and one other from the development. This lane is already a busy thoroughfare providing access between Smith and Valentine Street. It is also used by many local residents as a means of accessing Normandy Avenue. This lane is also joined by a feeder lane providing rear access for properties in Valentine and Smith Street. The development allows for a stacking type car park to be accessed through the lane catering for, I thought it was 18, but apparently it's 17 vehicles. This will result in much increased traffic at all hours, as well as noise related to mechanisms used in the stacking process. To worsen the scenario in the future, there are 3 adjacent properties fronting St George's Road, all in a fairly dilapidated state, and likely to be similarly developed in the near future, I think. And they would probably follow the parking precedent set by this development. This means that we could be facing parking access in the future for up to 100 vehicles in a lane about 80 metres long, with all the busy traffic and noise increase involved over all hours on our doorstep. We urge the council to consider this allowing access for parking from the lane and assisted people towards the road. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Rennie.
Yes, to the officers, if I could, thank you. I had a question about the proposed facilities at the top level, which was the communal open space. And there was, I think, a toilet proposed there, and that's been conditioned out. I wondered whether that actually added amenity for residents and whether it was in any way visible or likely to impact on anyone else, because I wasn't sure it would be visible. So could you comment on that?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, that both the 5 stories and the height have also both mandatory elements, and my understanding is that those requirements were not excluded as items that go above the height in the mandatory height. So both the height as it's expressed in metres, the height in metres, and the height in stories. So it really only allows for minimal community facilities and all running at that top level. So to start to put in other amenities and facilities, we run into conflict with the mandatory height. So it becomes actually prohibited to put those elements there.
Okay. Councillor Messina.
Through the officers, Madam Mayor, I'm concerned of the size of the building and the huge magnitude of them. Are the building materials used graffiti proof?
They're not considerations at this point,
Yep.
Madam Mayor, and it's probably unusual for a planning for a development of this type to go into those types of requirements, although there is definitely a focus on natural finishes with these types of developments, particularly in the lower levels. So what planning does turn its mind to is more the accessibility of these locations and visibility. So increasing the visibility reduces the incidence of those types of activities.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I just had 2 related questions. One picks up on the question that Councillor Redding talked about the mandatory heights. And I just wanted to know, given that there's a condition to keep the building within a 5-level mandatory height limit, what the implications will be on the built form in relation to that. And the related question is also in relation to accessibility. I note that it doesn't comply with the requirements, and again there is a condition to make it comply, and what the impact on the built form that will be.
Madam Mayor, no impact at all with the impact with the disability access requirements. That's a requirement simply says 50% of dwellings on each level need to. So that's probably one of the doorways, looking at how bathrooms are configured. With the aspect, all there is there's a fairly simple communal facility. Roof decks are allowed under the planning scheme. but it's when you start to change things to read as a story that's not specifically, so if you have amenities building or a roof. So the planning scheme contemplates lived overruns and minor community facilities and to go above that height. But it's not a common feature that's sort of picked up in the plans.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. I want to focus on the magnitude of the side of the buildings once again. Is there anything that we can do to place, subject to the vote of course, that we can put in the clause to the planning application to allow for some creative wall art on the side of the building rather than providing a blank canvas for tagging?
That's entirely under the discretion of the committee. What the planning scheme provisions do allow is that we would call this like a slot site, so it anticipates the sides either side, and that's where Mr. Clark was talking about equitable development. The planning scheme does contemplate development each side, and over time, it could be next year, it could be 20 years away, but
maybe never.
visible roads might be visible because of the building there.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. Through you to the officers, I was wondering if you could speak to the objector's concern about traffic and if this will set a precedent with the laneway if other buildings are developed.
Now, this was something that was anticipated and looked at with the planning scheme amendment C136. One of, I suppose, the paradoxes you have with these sites is that Vic Road is controlled St George's Road, and it's a road zone category 1, and what that means is there's restricted access. So if there's an alternative available, Vic Road, sort of the relevant authority for the management of access onto that road, will say, council and developers, you can't use that for additional access. You have a laneway which is treated as a road. So then the assessment becomes, is there capacity in that laneway? And as Mr. Paracus pointed out to you, was basically decided to what was in the traffic report. It's roughly, as you said, each 5 minutes there's a vehicle movement. That may reduce to 1 minute each when the other sites are developed. This is one of the larger sites of the term, there's 6 or 7 that are there. But it's certainly one of those things we rely on our advice from our transport management team. They're accepting the report's adequate, it provides enough evidence to satisfy the laneway has capacity.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Would anyone like to move a motion? Councillor Rennie?
Yes, I'd like to move a motion as recommended by the council report of notice of decision to grant a permit, subject to the conditions listed.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor Rennie?
Yes, I was impressed when I looked at these plans by the quality of the apartments that were on offer and the diversity in apartment dwelling size, which I think will cater for a lot of different people in the apartment market. Some are smaller, some are larger. That obviously means different price points for those looking for apartments. And I think that we see simply in the quality of plans that a lot of thought has gone into this. The plans are beyond what we normally see in terms of their presentation, and the finishes on the building certainly look to be of a high quality, and you can see that there's been some architectural input into this. That said, I looked very closely, and I believe I was the councillor who actually called this up and asked it to come to planning committee because I was interested in knowing more about access and traffic in that lane. I know that those adjoining streets do carry a bit of traffic and they're quite tight in terms of the number of cars parked along them, and so I do understand the concerns of residents in those streets. I also know, because I have friends who live in Valentine Street much further down myself, that when I drive down that street, most of the carports, the driveways don't actually appear to have a car in them. So I can only surmise that one of the reasons there's so many cars parked in the street is because people aren't using their driveways. And I think this is a real challenge for us, because I wouldn't dispute that there will be some visitor car parking overflow into the street. I anticipate that at some point in the future we might end up with permit parking in this street, and residents of this development will not be eligible for those permits. But the planning scheme is really clear that none of that is a reason to deny a planning permit here, particularly when what we're being presented with is actually very high quality plans for really nice apartments. That said, I would urge the developer to look at accessibility of all dwellings, not just the minimum 50%. I can't in this day and age think of any reason why anyone would build any apartment that didn't offer the possibility of full accessibility standards for future residents. None of us can know when we might break a leg and be in a wheelchair, need a support bar in a bathroom and want to know where the studs are in the walls. It seems to me that that should become standard practice. It's a really easy thing to do. If it's actually thoughtfully built into the design, it doesn't even cost more. So that would be something I would just say I think could be an improvement, but that's actually not something we can mandate in the planning approval process. And I go back to the fact that I think this is actually a good development. It's got some communal open space. It's got some good windows, some good air ventilation and flow through the apartments, and I think all of those are to be commended.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. Just briefly, I think this application should be supported. I think the design is high quality. I was really pleased by the sizes of the apartments, and I do understand the objectors' concerns with the traffic, but I think it's been satisfied that it'll be okay. So very happy to support this one.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'll speak in favour of it as well. I just wanted to, I suppose, pick up on the concerns of the objectors who spoke in terms of the issues around access and egress, which I know have been picked up by our officers in the report. And obviously, this is an emerging issue along St George's Road, with an increased number of medium to even, in some cases, higher density developments, and the use of the laneway as the access point. I think there's an opportunity here, and I think this, because this development in and of itself is the first in that block to get underway, an opportunity obviously for adjoining property owners to get highly involved, I suppose, in how traffic management occurs, because this is not a situation that's going to go away. The adjoining properties, no doubt, will face, similar development proposals in the future. I think if we were to start off with a development in this section, though, this is probably a pretty good start in the terms of the quality of the design, the setback, and the standards that it arrives at. I also would take the point, though, that Councillor Rennie raised, which is that I would have liked to have seen more than, I think it's a 57% accessibility rating for the number of apartments. So I think we can all do better on that front, and hopefully that's given some consideration when it goes to the next stage. I would also just note that in relation to the requirement for the applicant in this case to make a contribution to the public realm, there is an amount listed in here. I do hope it's sufficient to do the job, but we do need to see a contribution from developers and applicants when there is this impact on the public amenity, and of course greening St George's Road and adjoining areas is essential as part of that.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
I'm wondering if we can add an amendment or an addition to the planning
You
permit.
can propose an amendment? Yep.
Yes.
Do you want to read it out?
Yes, yep. The prior to the occupation of the development, a management plan should be provided, including an option for creative wall arts on both sides of the building.
Does the mover and seconder accept that?
Can I just hear it again?
That prior to the occupation of the development, a management plan should be provided, including an option for creative wall art on both sides of the building.
Can I just ask for some clarity? Does that mean, so they don't have to do it, it's just there's a plan to do it?
I would prefer that they actually take the action and
Let's get some advice from the officers about that condition. Mr. Rudd?
A little bit difficult and challenging one, I know it's something that we do actively encourage is to say, look, if the wall's going to be there for a while, is there something you can do to soften its appearance? So it's not without precedent, but we haven't probably gone as far. And, you know, the difficulty we have is that we haven't really been through a consultation or engagement process around this with the broader community and without including the development industry. So my concern that has just been raised is I'm not sure its contestability in VCAT if it's challenged. But I think it's probably something that we would appreciate some further direction and clarification from council, and we can do some more homework on it. But off the cuff tonight, I have to say, look, I'm not sure how this will go.
Okay. Councillor McCarthy?
Could I propose, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Messina, that maybe there's a policy response that council could have in relation to all these sorts of
Okay, we're not going to
sites?
get into the debate about the amendment. If it's not accepted by the mover and seconder, then Councillor Messina can move it as an amendment and find a seconder for it.
Yeah, so I don't accept it because, I don't accept it.
So we can move it now as an amendment. Is there a seconder for Councillor Messina's amendment?
For the sake of the debate, I'll...
Okay, so that's
I'll
seconded by
second
Councillor
the
Griffin.
amendment.
Councillor Messina, would you like to speak to the amendment?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I think it's fair to say that there is a proposal for overdevelopment on the St George's Road precinct, and at the moment we have blank canvases along the corridor that are created and tagged, and they become eyesores in our community. It's an extra resources on council on an ongoing budget basis. It explores more of our resources. What I like to see is some more proactive measures in terms of keeping it graffiti free and keeping less resources out of the pockets of, unfortunately, from our budgets, and then having some materials that are perhaps that we cannot tag and creative wall spaces that don't create eyesores along the St George's Road corridor.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Greco, did you want to speak?
Just in regards to the amendment, after hearing what Councillor Messina said, look, I think I will support the amendment for the sake that and I appreciate what the officers have said, that whether it's one of those issues that we can mandate at VCAT, and that remains sort of a bit of uncertainty around that. But I would think that given the quality design and the extent that the developer has gone to in putting forward this application, that they will go that extra step of doing some work on the side facades of the wall. The other point why I'm supporting this motion is that, as our officers said, that you can get some developments occurring very quickly on either side within a year or 2 years, which then solves the problem. But it could be up to 20 years, and we don't know. So to have that, those walls exposed for that period of time, I think a measure like this, which in the end will be really an interim measure, I think it helps to beautify the city, and I think that it will be a welcomed addition. And I'm sure that the developers, if they thought about it, they would be encouraged to follow this suggestion if we were to put it as a condition.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. So I support the principle of what Councillor Messina is talking about, but I respect the officer's direction here that this is something that might be better off in a policy or having some consultation done rather than making a decision that might not hold up at VCAT tonight. So I'll be opposing it.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Rennie.
I've been sitting here pondering Councillor Messina's motion and the words and what it actually asks of the developer, and in fact it's really asking for the development of a management plan for the walls that might potentially attract graffiti. One option being creative wall art, but that would be one option in a management plan. In many ways I would hope and expect that all developers and building owners actually did have a management plan for how they might keep their buildings looking clean and appropriate. And on that basis, I feel as though this can be supported. I also note, I don't necessarily share Councillor Messina's concern for this particular building, partly because actually on either side of this building are private property. So this is not a building on a corner site, which are the buildings that tend to be particularly vulnerable to graffiti. Looking at the appearance of the front of the building, it also doesn't strike me as being particularly vulnerable to graffiti relative to those buildings where we tend to see that. Having said that, I'll go back to the fact that I think actually for all building owners, for body corporates, for developers, having a sense of how you would manage the public face of your building and keep it looking clean and orderly, I think is a good thing, and on that ground can be supported.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
I think if I can, look, I'm willing to support it, but just if I can propose a couple of words just to make it a little bit clearer, if I may, to the mover and seconder.
I'm not sure that we can start wordsmithing an amendment. No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I think the officers would probably be able to navigate this anyway, but I think the issue here, as Councillor Rennie has pointed out, is that it's really about how the external appearance is managed, and so we don't have a set policy in this regard. So I suppose that is my one little bit of anxiety here, is that we're introducing a clause in the absence of a policy to guide this, which would happen as a matter of course. But something like this really should just be to the satisfaction of the responsible authority, and I think that's hopefully implied in the wording, which is that if our officers feel that what is proposed to deal with the external facing walls, particularly given that there's going to be a period of time potentially between this development going up and other developments, that there is a role for our officers to engage with the developer in that process, and hopefully that there is a process to ensure that if Councillor Messina's concerns come to bear, that in fact there is whether it's wall art or a quick response or whatever it might be, it is a prominent site, and it will be a prominent wall whether or not the risk is as high as been perceived. So I'm happy to support it, but I think we really need a policy in this space.
I agree.
Thank you. Any further speakers? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And that amendment is carried and will be incorporated into the substantive. Yeah. So is there any other speakers to the motion? No other speakers? No? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. So the Planning Committee has decided to grant the planning permit. The decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT, and the applicant has 60 days. A notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. Thank you. Moving now to item 5.2, application for a planning permit at 249 Spring Street Reservoir.
Application has been received at 249 Spring Street Reservoir. The proposal is a four-storey apartment containing 14 dwellings, 9 one-bedroom dwellings, 3 two-bedroom dwellings and 2 three-bedroom dwellings. Vehicle access is to be going into Cleveland Street, and it will provide access to a stacker system that accommodates 14 cars. The proposal is to waive 2 visitor spaces that would have been required and 2 of the dwellings car spaces. The 2 dwellings that face Spring Street have ground level garden areas for their private open space, and all other dwellings have balconies for private open space at either the ground level or the upper floor levels. Notice was given and 2 signs on site were provided and letters to the adjoining and surrounding owners and occupiers. 9 objections were received to the opinion notice. These objections have been summarised on page 32 and then responded to on pages 32 and 33. As it's described and explained in the officer's report, this proposed development gains support from many aspects of the planning scheme. The height is appropriate. The proposal allows for any redevelopment on the building sites to be provided with equivalent light access and setbacks. The proposal is well located in the reservoir structure plan. The proposal is within the design and development overlay 18 and within an area earmarked as residential intensification. The proposed generally complies with the requirements of the DDO and residential growth zone. And finally, the proposal abuts a non-residential use. Therefore, the officer's recommendation is to support the proposal and issue a notice of decision to grant planning permit.
Thank you. There is no one registered from the applicant to speak, so I'll call on Angelo Ganji, an objector. Would you like to take a seat? Thank you. Thanks.
I'll speak on behalf of those objectors, so that they'll have meeting for me tonight. Our major objection is the overall height of the building, being 4 stories, is an unacceptable outcome in a site that is approximately 13 metres in width. It will present an unproportionate eyesore on the current streetscape. The current streetscape is predominantly single-storey dwellings. This includes St. School, church and residential dwellings. The massive height difference between the proposed development and its immediate neighbours is an unreasonable change. The shadow cast by a 4-storey building, of which 3 stories are on the boundary, is completely unreasonable and unprecedented. The 3-storey wall is excessive in a commercial zone, let alone a residential zone. Particularly, the development reaches standard B17. The major issue with the proposal is the height as it relates to the property to the south. The description of the zone contemplates variations of rest code for B17 only for sites above 22 metres or 16 metres with a side vehicle access. This site is 13 metres wide and well short of this requirement. Therefore, the schedule to the zone stipulates B17 compliance for side setbacks. There is no provision in the schedule or the design development overlay that suggests the adjoining use can have an impact on this variable. This is to control building bulk in a residential zone. Attached drawings just indicating what we believe to be the appropriate setbacks that were provided by one of the objectors. Council should be considering when making decisions in growth zones that the only other development land within this growth zone is the neighbouring property at 247 Spring Street. And its narrow width and opening balconies to its south means we'll never achieve a 4-storey form, even a 3-storey form is questionable. Development will provide equitable development rights to the property to its south in 247 Spring Street. Although the property is currently being used as a proprietary practice, it is a residential zone and could in future be converted to residential use given the zone. Further, the building height will present as completely unreasonable bulk to the property along Cleveland Street, especially to the neighbouring property at number 1 Cleveland Street. The balconies facing number 1 Cleveland Street should be altered and open to views and access to north only, street facing, and not to the residential properties to the west. Other issues to consider are lack of visitor parking, given the busy precinct of Spring Street and Cleveland Street, limited parking in Cleveland Street, privacy concerns regarding proposed overlooking balconies, interest in going to primary school and residential properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have questions? So, would like to move a motion?
Happy to move an alternative motion.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Would you like to read out the motion?
To issue the notice of refusal to grant planning permit, the development is contrary to the state and local planning policy objectives contained in clause 15.01, clause 15.01-5, clause 21.03 and clause 21.03-2 of the planning of the Darebin planning scheme. In particular, the proposal does not provide an appropriate housing topology suited to the site. The apartment style development results in build form, scale and intensity that is not responsive to the constraints of the site area and the frontage width. 2. The clause 32.07-10 of the Darebin planning scheme
Scheme 3 to the residential growth zone. The development is contrary to the requirements of the schedule to the residential growth zone as follows. A, the development does not comply with the street setback standard B6 requirement and results in excessive visual bulk to Cleveland Street and inappropriate height transition to the lower scale residential areas to the west. B, there are insufficient open areas available on the site to satisfy the minimum landscaping and canopy tree requirements. C, the development does not comply with the side and rear setback requirement standard B17 and results in excessive build form and visual bulk impacts on the southern and western adjoining properties. D, the development does not comply with walls on the boundary requirement standard B18 and results in excessive build form along the southern boundary with the potential to affect the development opportunities for the adjoining southern property. 3, clause 43.02, design and development overlay schedule 18. The proposed development in contrary to the objectives of the overlay as follows. A, the southern walls and setbacks of the proposed development have not been designed to allow corresponding development on the southern adjoining property. B, the site does not have a minimum frontage width to support the construction of the apartment style development and constitutes an overdevelopment of the site. C, within the context of the ground, B, above, the development envelope does not comply with the setback requirements from the southern and western boundaries. D, the proposal is contrary to the design objectives of the Residential Built Form Design Guidelines 2014. 4, clause 52.34, bicycle facilities. The development does not provide a sufficient level of bicycle parking on the site to support the waiver of car parking and promote green travel in the area that has good access to cycling infrastructure.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor Williams.
Well, considering the site and all the nearby houses are actually only a single storey, there is an overdevelopment, particularly it's just a residential zone. It does build right up to the boundaries and it doesn't allow the adjoining properties to build themselves. There's definitely, doesn't comply with those setbacks for the streets. It's excessive visual bulk, it's inappropriate height transition to sensitive interfaces that are nearby in Cleveland. There's definitely a constriction regarding parking along Cleveland. I don't know if people are aware of the parking situation there. If you look even in the picture, that the first picture, parking there is actually for handicap for the RSL, which is across the road. And it doesn't comply with walls and boundaries on the adjoining southern property.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Lasserve. I didn't feel as though I could support this development in its current form, although I'm less inclined than Councillor Williams to think that this is a matter of height. I think that this site sooner or later probably will see development of this height, but I would hope that what we'll see is development of a slightly better quality, given that it is actually quite a prominent site in Reservoir, which is going to be seen from the station. Last year we approved actually a somewhat bigger apartment building than this, just one corner further to the north. And the difference, I think, was all in the quality. That this building doesn't look to have anything really to recommend it, to make it stand out and actually overcome those deficiencies in areas of non-compliance. So every so often we do overlook a non-compliance on a setback, but it's usually in the context of exemplary design. And I don't see exemplary design here. I don't see the sort of thought that went into the last apartment building that we approved 20 minutes ago. And I would hope, in fact, that the developers would come back with something that's of a higher standard, because I don't believe that the residents of Reservoir deserve a lesser level of apartment dwelling than the residents of Thornbury.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Look, I'll be supporting the amendment, and my main concerns are, as the report also points out, is in relation to the setbacks. obviously in regards to the visual bulk, which is linked up also to the permeability. We note that it doesn't meet the standards of permeability, which that has implications for the bulk of the building that is being envisaged for that particular site. Also, there are issues with landscaping, and all those things put together, to me, result clearly in an overdevelopment for that particular site. Also, I note in that area there, if you like, the business district goes, in effective terms, it goes up to the corner, to the preceding corner, and whilst I take the point that we will see some development on the other corner, but I don't think that at the moment what's being put on the table sufficiently transitions to the residential homes that flow down that particular street. I think a much more creative design that enables, that doesn't have that enormous visual bulk aspect about it, that transitions into the residential areas, could be envisaged in the future, but I don't think that this particular design cuts it. So that's why I'm supporting the motion to reject this application put forward by Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. A notice detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Moving now to item 5.3, application for a development plan at 198 Beavers Road, Northcote. Officers.
Thank you. This item on the agenda is a little different from the previous two. It's seeking approval for a development plan. Now, this is a preliminary process in the planning scheme where a development plan owner requires a development plan to be approved. Where these are usually required is you've got either an area, in this case, that is undergoing further renewal, and there are multiple owners, and the development plan tries to coordinate that development where there are different ownership patterns to a vision or a plan that was expressed in the planning scheme amendment we approved. In this case, Amendment C122 was approved in 2015, so it's quite recent. That also was supported by engagement and a fairly lengthy process with the community and the owners within the Beavers Road, Upton Road area. So it looked at a number of issues, including the impacts on the creek, transport, traffic was a key concern, and it's been raised again in the engagement process of this application. So the development plan process is essentially a conceptual process that is informed by Council when it makes a decision on planning permit. So as the report sets out, there's been a similar approval provided recently to Beavers Road. They are now acting on the planning permit, it's under construction and nearing completion. This particular application proposes a combination of 3 and 4-storey forms. The 4-storey forms is an apartment, 3-storey forms are in townhouses. They line the perimeter of the site, and there's a small cafe that they're proposing at the Beavers Road frontage. The layout of the buildings, including the setbacks and internal access roads, are all explained in conceptual form in the plans that are attached to the report. Indicatively, the layout shows and describes the possibility for 95 dwellings and up to 175 car spaces. Some of those are proposed under the structure and some on and arrangements. There's a detailed description of this in the site and its context on pages 69 to 70 of the report. This shows that the site and confirms the site is located in a residential growth zone, which also carries a 4-storey entry height, which in this case conceptual and indicative plans of the proposed development, and following notice of development being provided for the broader area, there's been 12 submissions that have been received. They've been circulated this morning as a supplementary report. And that's due, we've got quite long lead-ups now to the reporting process. So these reports are completed a number of weeks ago. And objections are received up to the point that council makes a decision. So it's not unusual that we receive objections. In this case, when the report was written, there were no objections received, and there have now been 12 received in that time, and then the report was complete as now. Just to do justice to those, they're not in the substantive report, but those concerns of traffic impacts, noise impacts, overshadowing, overlooking, reduction of setbacks, general safety concerns, loss of vegetation, impacts during construction, access concerning private road, 177 Beers Road, number of type of dwellings, social housing not being there, and public housing, public access through the site, contamination and other public transport infrastructure. There's a detailed commentary on each of those concerns, which I won't go through. I want to highlight those concerns because each is the other in the report. Subject to some further guidance and plans, there's some conditions in there requiring changes to the future planning and the lodge as a planning application. The application is considered supportive. These changes will be promoted through permit conditions to ensure compliance both with the development plan overlay and the general provisions of the planning scheme. They focus on things such as improving pedestrian connectivity through the site, improving bike links, and increasing building setbacks so there is compliance with the development plan overlay. There's also a requirement to improve the ground floor regulation and passive surveillance, particularly for the town halls. And the Mayor has recommended that the development plan be supported and approved.
Thank you. I'll now call on Claire Whelan to make a presentation on behalf of the applicant.
So as the officers have mentioned, this is a development plan application to determine the broad overarching principles for the development of this site rather than a planning permit application. So there is a lesser level of detail, but a planning permit application will follow and council will have the opportunity to assess that detail in due course. We have, the office recommended approval with conditions including some changes, which I'll come to later because we do have concerns with a couple of them. There is a bit of history to this application. It's been before council before in a previous form that was eventually refused last year. It's as a result a very highly resolved application now. It's taken those comments on board and it's changed accordingly. The site is a really great opportunity site to provide housing diversity. It's really well located, it's a large site, and it presents an excellent opportunity for minimal potential amenity impacts because of the interfaces. So the proposal is being signed in accordance with the DPO, and with consideration given to those guidelines within the schedule. It's maximum 4 stories in height, it transitions to the rear, to the residential properties that are outside of the DPO. And it has considered and provided setbacks to the approved development that's nearly finished now, 200 feet of road. And it also includes the link sought by the development plan overlay through the north-south to provide connectivity for pedestrians. It includes parking in accordance with 5206, so it's not seeking reduction, and it will meet the best guidelines for best practice with regards to ESD, which is something that the developer is quite passionate about. It's also been referred internally and externally, and there's been no objections lodged, which is by those referral authorities, which is usually indicative of a well thought through scheme. With the conditions, I'll just quickly mention the two that we do have concern with are condition H, which relates to a maximum of 95 dwellings. Whilst that's what's being proposed currently in the planning permit application, locking in that level of detail in the development plan we don't believe is appropriate. It doesn't allow any flexibility for our client to change in the future if they wanted to rearrange the layout to have more modest and compact dwellings, which may increase the number within the same building footprint, which we don't think is a fair requirement at this stage. As I mentioned, when the planning permit application comes in, council will have the opportunity to assess all of those matters. But I think that particular condition is too onerous to apply to a development plan. The other one is condition N, which requires no fencing to Beavers Road or to the internal access way. Have no issue with the Beavers Road interface. I think that's appropriate. But within the development, there are some dwellings with ground floor private open space that face onto the internal access way, and these need some kind of delineation for those areas from the internal access way and the pedestrian pathways within the site. So we would prefer to see a condition that states that the fence, some more transparent fencing would be allowable in those instances, so that private open space is still separated and secure from the public open space. But we believe that the private open space is appropriate in those locations because it does allow for interaction and activation along those internal access ways and passive surveillance, which are all things that are sought by the development plan. I think those are the key points. Yeah, I believe those are the key points I wanted to get through, so.
Great, thank you. You can return to your seat in the gallery. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Rennie.
Thank you for you, Mayor Lassurf, to the officers. Was there any discussion with the developers about the possibility of some form of social affordable housing in this development?
It was raised in the first application, it's not been raised. It's not something that the planning scheme can mandate or require. So the discussion goes along the lines of would you be prepared to agree to change. It's not part of the development plan before you, so it's obviously clear there's not an intention at this stage.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Rennie.
Yes, could I get a response from the officers to the issue of fencing of private open space in an area where we've identified that we wouldn't want to see fences, as per condition N, I think it was?
Yeah. I'd probably beg to differ that there's probably more discretion through the permit process than what's probably applied through the condition. So the development plan is asking for the things the applicant has put forward in terms of permeability and good surveillance. So I would say there's a scheme that does allow for a different form of fencing that doesn't raise our concerns about safety and surveillance being marginalised, then it's something that the planning permit application could contemplate and consider. So I would contend that the planning permit or the condition proposed has a bit more flexibility in this matter.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Would anyone like to move motions? Councillor sorry, did you have a question?
If I could just ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, just very quickly, I note in the report on page 71 about the Aboriginal cultural heritage.
Yep.
And I note that it also says that the cultural heritage management plan is not required. I just wanted to ask through you, Mayor, to the officers, whether the Wurundjeri Council were consulted in regards to that. I appreciate that it was a previous landfill site, but notwithstanding that,
Yep.
whether the Wurundjeri Council are aware of this application and whether they were consulted.
Mr Rudd?
Madam Mayor, they weren't consulted as part of this application. They were notified regarding the broader rezoning application. They did not make a submission during that process, and that's simply because the legislation protects their interests. So that's the Aboriginal Heritage Act. It does require a cultural heritage management plan to be undertaken. Would be considered if the site is being disturbed by a suitably qualified person, may deem the site is subject to substantial disturbance and is not required. But at least through the Act, through the planning scheme requirements, I'm fairly clear that their interests are protected. So it's at the planning permit stage that question really has to be answered about whether there is cultural significance on the site. So that's done through a specialist. The first thing they will do is look at, has the site been subject to substantial disturbance? If not, the assessment's required because of its proximity to Mary Creek.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Messina, Councillor McCarthy, do you have a question or are you going to move the motion?
No, I've got a...
We might just deal with the questions.
Do questions first.
Yep.
Yeah.
Councillor Messina?
Just a simple question through you, Madam Mayor, to the officers. The waste, there's only a mention of collection of waste by private contractor. Will there be any mention about a waste management plan?
Madam Mayor, that will come up in the planning permit, and it's usually a standard condition. It's certainly a requirement of the planning permit process for us to have an indication. Sites like this are challenging, so it's certainly will be a consideration of the planning permit. So you can't imagine having all the bins internal out of the road.
That's what I'm trying to avoid.
Thank you.
And in addition to that, what about adding in electric car charging facility? Will that be also be looked at?
We can take that on notice, and as you've heard, the applicants expressed a commitment to high sustainability being demonstrated on the site. That's a conversation we can have, and when the application is circulated back to councillors through our internal processes, you'd be satisfied with us that question.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
I was prepared to move the recommendation with an additional point, which I'll read for the benefit of councillors in the gallery. I'm not sure if it would be listed as 11LL or point 12, guided by officers in terms of the content, so I'll read it here. The condition would be, before the development is occupied, a contribution towards intersection works for the Beavers Road and Woolhouse Street for Beavers Road and Woolhouse Street to restrict through vehicle access from the subject site to St George's Road in accordance with the design is to be prepared. In accordance with the design to be prepared by Darebin City Council.
So that becomes condition.
I think that
11
condition 12 or 11. Condition 12. Do I need to read that out again?
Let's read it out again.
Sorry, I got my words jumbled.
Yeah, you did a bit.
So, condition 12. Before the development is occupied, a contribution towards intersection works. A contribution must be made towards intersection works for Beavers Road and Woolhouse Street to restrict through vehicle access from the subject site to St George's Road in accordance with a design to be prepared by Darebin City Council.
Cool. Okay. Is there a seconder for the motion? That's seconded by Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie, and apologies, it's a complicated sentence, so I'll pass that through to our officers. I believe and I recall that I might have actually moved the refusal of the development plan over a year ago now and raised some concerns with that at that stage, and had done so previous to that as well, seeking to see some of the issues resolved. I'm pleased to see that there has been some redesign of this application and also of this development plan, and I note that it is a development plan, it is not the planning permit, and the planning permits obviously will follow. What I'm aware of, though, is that by virtue of the 95 additional dwellings being placed in this site, it is a significant change of use from the sort of industrial, commercial and office uses that exist at the moment. And knowing the site and the location very well, and knowing, of course, the work that Council is doing at the end of Beavers Road with our bridge, this is a high-trafficked area and will continue to be. It is an area which has a lot of public interest, a lot of community interest, and we need to be very aware of the fact that any increase in density in this location, and it is not a bad place to create new housing opportunities because there is a change in the land use there, comes with it some consideration as to the impact on the adjoining neighbourhood, and particularly those people that live along Beavers Road and also Woolhouse Street and License Grove as well, managing the traffic impacts of having a lot more people. I'm hoping that if the message from the developer is what I'm hearing, that we're going to see a similar appeal to a similar market as has happened with the adjoining development at 200 Beavers Road, which is a far more sustainable, connected to place type development, and obviously a lot of users of the Beavers Road Bridge, which I no doubt will be underway hopefully in time for this. The changes that have been made, and there are a number of changes that have been made since this last came to us, are welcome. The devil's always in the detail, and I think that we are going to see obviously the planning permit process play through, and I hope that we can see some of the issues that have been raised dealt with as much as possible through that, so that what we do have here is a really great outcome in terms of housing and a good location, and that has high environmental value. And I think, you know, Councillor Greco's point about the Aboriginal heritage is really important. It was a former landfill site, and so therefore the triggers are a little bit different. But we do need to see protection of the existing amenity as much as we can, whilst also seeing that change of use. And I think that the conditions go some way to achieving that as well. So thank you to the officers for all their work on this.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I very much look forward to the sort of quality housing that I think will actually flow out of this change to the use of this land. And one of the sort of measures that we look at is will there be a net community benefit? And I actually think that this will create that benefit. I think the cafe, for example, will be well used and much loved, given that there's a school there, there's 2 gymnastics centres which have parents desperate for somewhere to hang around for an hour while they wait for their kids to do gym, not to mention all new residents in this development and the adjoining development. That said, I support the limit of 95 dwellings on this site, although I've heard the concern that that might limit the sort of dwelling diversity. I would say that if someone is proposing more dwellings than that and wanted us to consider that, then we would need some concessions, particularly in the form of affordable or social housing, because the dwellings as they stand at the moment I think are going to be family homes when I look at the number of car parks and the number of dwellings proposed. If they were going to propose 1 or 2 bedroom dwellings, then I would say some of those should be social housing, and that hasn't been part of the package. So 95 dwellings it is. I hope that there will be a lot of consideration to getting cars off and out of the streetscape in this development. It was the one concern I had when I looked at the final page of the plans, to see nothing but cars at ground level in the building on the south-east corner. If that came to me in a planning permit, I would not look upon that favourably. The more of those cars that can be put underground or creatively garaged in ways that don't mean they're the dominant feature of this development, I think the better. But having said that, we want really quality housing. I think that with the bridge coming, with our investment in infrastructure, it's going to be more important to actually show that the infrastructure is needed in this location.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be supporting this development plan, but I will be supporting it very reluctantly, I must say. As Councillor McCarthy mentioned, in the previous council, we went through the process of rezoning this particular area. As part of the discussions for the rezoning of the area, there was extensive talk about social housing and incorporating future social housing in this particular space, and I'm really disappointed in the sense that that hasn't actually flowed through. I understand that, of course, from a council perspective, we cannot mandate social housing. We don't have inclusionary zoning provisions to compel developers to set aside an amount of social housing, particularly on sites within the inner city, because of the it's just the way that the planning rules are set up here in Victoria. So for me, that's really unfortunate. But again, I was in two minds whether to vote against it or not. But because we don't have the actual powers to insist on social housing, it urged me towards supporting the development of that plan because of all the reasons that have been stated. It's a site that clearly needs development. We would expect that the development will be quality homes because they'll be targeted to high-income earners, and as a result of that, they expect some quality. I'm hoping still, I hold my hopes that maybe at the planning stage we could convince the developers to entertain the idea of some social housing, maybe even, as Councillor Rennie said, for some other exchange, and I look forward to that conversation in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Brefo. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. So the Planning Committee has decided to adopt the development plan, and the applicant can appeal that decision. Next item is item 6, other business, 6.1, general planning information, scheduled VCAT applications. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? Motion's carried. Item 7 is urgent business. There is no urgent business, and that brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.